All right, hello everybody, and welcome to episode 36 of the Hot Path Show. And joined by a very special guest today, we got Hugo, aka Code Monkey.
Hello and welcome. I'm your Code Monkey. Oh,
We
oh, that's a sound that caught me
have
off
a little
guard.
sound bite.
Nice.
I gotta ask you, is that do you record that new every time, or do you just like reuse the same clip?
No, yeah, I do record it every time. I mean, it's a pretty short sequence, so
No,
yeah, I can
it is,
definitely.
but you're very consistent with it. So I'm like, I
Yeah,
wonder if
by
he
now
reuses
it
the
does sound pretty. Yeah, can be pretty consistent nowadays. I've said it so many times. I mean, I've made like over 800 videos, so yeah, it's quite insane how many times I've said that phrase. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know I was just kind of watching through like a bunch of your lectures, and you say it, even at the beginning of every
Yeah.
single lecture and everything. Yeah,
Yeah, it's nice. I like consistency.
yeah. It's good to kind of start things out consistently like that. So yeah. Anyways, welcome in. How's it going?
Right. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Johnny. Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of the show. I've watched it many times. So I'm a big fan of that. So this show is obviously awesome. So yeah, thank you so much for having
Yeah.
me. Should be
Well,
fun. Yeah.
I'm very excited to have you here. We're going to be talking about all kinds of exciting dots topics. Also, really great to see you. We got a whole bunch of people in chat here today. Very
Yeah.
exciting episode. Yeah, and again, if you do have any questions for Hugo, related to dots or anything else, feel free to just kind of post those in the chat, and we can kind of queue them up and have a little bit of chats later on. But yeah, today we're going to be just kind of like talking about some dots topics and cool stuff like that. But before we get into all that, we like to kind of start things off with a little bit of a warm-up topic, something that's maybe a little bit off topic or topical. But so Hugo, you recently completed a marathon, so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. How'd it go?
Yeah, I did. And thankfully it did go quite well. I mean, I did technically make my first marathon last year, but it did not go well at all. I was not very well prepared. So at about kilometer 27, my knee just gave out, and I
Ooh.
basically limped towards the finish line for the last 15 kilometers. So yeah, last year was very painful. And this year, basically the goal was, okay, let's do it proper and let's actually do it start to finish. And thankfully, yeah, I did manage to do it and didn't get injured. I managed to get an even better time than I thought. I mean, I thought, okay, under 5 hours, I'm happy. I managed to make it in 4 hours and 31 minutes, which
That's
for me
well,
was definitely
well under 5 hours. Yeah.
yeah. For me, I was extremely happy with that result. That was super awesome. So yeah, very, very happy to have completed that goal. Definitely one of the hardest things I've ever done. I mean, when I was on when I was on like kilometer 30 and I'm looking at my watch and I'm like, oh God, I still have like over an hour left to go.
I know you start
Oh,
doing that, like
yeah.
math in your head. Like you're like, oh, like how long is this going to take me? Like I know how long it
Yeah.
takes to, run this distance. And
Yeah, the last 10 kilometers were very painful. I was like, it's kind of funny how the course basically ended where I normally train. So those last 10 kilometers
okay.
usually as I train. But usually when I'm training, those 10 kilometers go by so fast.
Right. It's
Now,
your first 10
now as I
kilometers.
was going through those, oh man, it was just like I would run a little bit, look to the side. How come I'm still here? It seems like I'm not moving at all. So yeah, when you're extremely tired, all of a sudden running just 1 kilometer feels like an insane amount. So yeah,
No
that
kidding.
was super difficult.
How was the course? Was it like pretty hilly or pretty
Yeah.
flat?
No, thankfully that part pretty good. It's all very flat. There's just a tiny bit of an incline in the beginning, then it's all pretty much flat going downhill. So yeah, thankfully the course setup is actually really nice. Plenty of aid stations with lots of water, gels, and so on. So yeah, that was all very nicely organized. And the path itself is also really nice. So right by the river, so the whole thing is quite beautiful
good
going
scenic,
through that area. Yeah,
Nice. Awesome.
yeah, that does help quite a bit. Being able to run around, just look around at all the environment, that
Yeah.
helps quite a lot.
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot different than like running that many, miles
Oh,
around
yeah.
a track or something
Oh
like
yeah, that
which
would be
is, like,
insane.
the same thing.
I don't
and,
think
like,
I would be able to
it
do
all
that.
blends together. Yeah, that's just that's torture. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, you mentioned those aid stations. When I did my marathon, those were the things that kept me going. I was like, I know like every 2 miles there's going to be one of those aid stations, and I can get those little electrolytes, refill my water
yeah.
bottle, and it's just like let me just get to that next little milestone. And yeah.
Yeah, I don't even know how much water I drank in total. Probably like 3 or 4 liters. Like every time they give me an entire bottle, I would drink the whole thing and keep going. So,
Yeah.
it would,
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, how much energy burned. Do you know how many
yeah.
calories that you burned during the?
On my watch, it said 4,000 calories. So
Yeah,
that
I
is,
think that was what
that's
about what it
quite a
was for
bit.
me. How did your legs feel afterwards? Was it were you pretty
Pretty messed
sore?
up.
Or yeah, yeah.
Very sore. Yeah, definitely for the rest of that day. I couldn't move. I wanted to do some work, but I couldn't really do anything. So I was just at the couch watching a movie because I really could not move at all. I couldn't even walk straight. It got to a point where after spending like 4 hours running at a pretty regular pace, like I couldn't lift my knees just because I was going at a pretty slow pace. So my knees were basically just going backwards, was never really going forwards. So
Oh,
basically doing
okay.
this movement over here, I couldn't do it for like 6 hours afterwards because the muscle was just so tight that really couldn't move it much. So yeah, lots
Yeah.
of pain on that day in the afternoon. Then for like 2 days after. So yeah.
Yeah, it is amazing, yeah, how hard it is on your body, just that
Oh
like
yeah.
repetitive, just like
Yeah.
banging into the ground for 4.5 hours straight. Like, yeah.
Yeah. It is definitely possibly the most challenging thing I've ever done. So
I completely agree. I mean, we're probably scaring people off from doing a marathon right now, but I would definitely
I mean,
recommend it.
yeah.
It's a really great experience.
Well, I would say you don't have to start with a marathon. So I would definitely
That's
say.
true. That is 100% true. But it's a good thing to kind of work up
Yeah,
to.
yeah, constantly work up to that because when I started running like I don't know 5 years ago or so, back then the first thing that I would try to run was just running from my home to the gym, which is just 2.5 kilometers, and I could not run the whole thing.
Yeah.
I had to stop in the middle after like 2 kilometers. Yeah, I couldn't run anymore. I had to stop and walk the whole way. So yeah, it's all about slowly increasing distance little by little, and yeah, after a few years of constantly doing that, yeah, finally get it up to 42 kilometers.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And did your city show up pretty well? Like was there like a good amount of people like cheering you
Oh
on
yeah.
along the way and everything?
Oh yeah, definitely on very split. Like it goes through a bunch of big towns. So on those, yeah, plenty of people. And at the final ending spot, that is usually a spot that is full of tourists. So now it's like full of tourists plus a ton of people that live around here. So yeah, a mountain of people right there. It's a really nice event thing. Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, that was another thing with when I did the marathon. It was like just really cool to like have everyone, cheering you on. It like definitely
Yeah.
like gives you a
Oh yeah.
good
Oh
little
yeah.
boost of energy.
Yeah, it does help quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, congrats on your recent marathon. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Thank
awesome
you.
stuff. Yeah. Wanted to bring up this little question here from Mr. Awesome. How much have you gamified your life? Is this something that resonates with you? Is this something you try to do to kind of
Oh yeah.
gamify aspects of your life?
Definitely. I mean, the main one for me is really the gym. I mean, I look at the gym like an RPG, so very much gamified. I see it as basically every rep that I do, I'm gaining 1 EXP. Then after a while, I can increase the weight on the bar, which is essentially leveling up. Then gain some more EXP, keep leveling up, and so on. So yeah, that
That's
is my my
that's a good
main
way to
thing.
look at it. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
each
yeah,
rep is EXP, and then yeah,
yeah,
as you kind of fill up your EXP meter, then you can get
yeah.
to the next
Level
level.
up, and then keep grinding, keep doing some more. Yeah.
Nice. Are you pretty meticulous about like keeping track of, how many reps and weight
Yeah.
you do on the different
For the
exercises?
main exercise, yeah. So like squat, bench, deadlift, yeah. Usually track that one very well. For the other ones, like I don't know, bicep curls, yeah. For those more generic, just you try to push it to the max. But yeah,
Awesome. That's good stuff. Um, let's see. I think we got a couple other questions I might want to hit later on. But yeah, if you do have any questions for Hugo as far as any development topics or something like that, feel free to just put those in the chat, and we'll be kind of going into those a little bit later on. But yeah, as we start getting into some ECS topics, real quickly, I do just have a couple quick miscellaneous announcements. So Unity has been posting a bunch more of their Unite talks. So
yeah.
Danny's talk on the connecting the dots, the let's make a game with entities, that one is up. Yeah, I was actually just watching it very briefly last night. And were you at the his talk live?
Yeah. I was. It was really nice. I thought it was really cool. The little game that they made, the little Plants vs Zombies. That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah, doing
Bugs
that
versus
little.
coders.
Yeah, yeah. That was a really fun concept. It was really nice, and I actually learned something. Even though it was more of a beginner talk, I did learn something that I did not know, which was about how when you schedule jobs, if you're in an I system, if you schedule like two jobs by itself, if you just call .schedule, it won't actually run both of them in parallel. It will run one and then the other one. because the whole
Right.
thing
Yeah.
about code completion background, when you schedule one, basically updates the state dependency of that system, and then when you do the other one, basically depends on the previous one. So the proper way to do it, which they showed in that talk, which is where I learned about that, is basically manually grab the job dependencies, the job handle of each of those jobs, then combine them, and then update the state dependency. So yeah, even though it was a beginner talk, I myself still learned quite a bit. So yeah, definitely
Yeah.
awesome.
He definitely kind of snuck a couple like
Oh yeah.
or intermediate advanced dots topics in there, which was good. But yeah, I forgot that Anna, she was like the one working the clicker. I
Yeah,
forgot she was having
and
so
didn't
many
work.
problems with the clicker throughout the talk. So but yeah, anyways, that talk is up. And then also the City Skylines ECS talk is
Oh,
up as
nice.
well. Did you see that one live?
Yeah, I saw that one, although it was a bit confusing. I mean, the main thing that I took away is just that they implemented dots before dots was stable, so they had to build so many things from scratch. So yeah,
Yeah.
definitely
Although
that
they
was a
did end
tricky
up
one.
shipping with the 1.0 version of ECS,
Yeah,
so
yeah, they said
it
how
seems
they
like they were
were
kind of
constantly updating,
updating, yeah.
upgrading things, but yeah, that
Which
must
that
be
seems like a very big game to
very
be
tricky. Yeah.
constantly upgrading and, especially with how significant some of those breaking
Oh
changes
yeah,
were in some
yeah.
of those upgrade paths, so
And there was also the interesting question at the end where someone someone asked, okay, so basically all the performance issues at launch, were they related to dots or not? And I remember that the guy answered that no, that was not the
yeah.
issue. It was more like GPU or something. So yeah.
Right. So yeah, check out those talks. And then speaking of talks, I actually gave a talk at the JetBrains Game Dev Days yesterday.
Oh,
So
nice.
they just have like the big live stream up right now. So you can find my talk. It's actually the last talk of the event. And yeah, it's kind of like an introduction, basically introduction into dots, why I think it's cool and why I'm really glad that Unity is, kind of using dots as kind of more of like the core backbone of their engine. So yeah, and actually maybe we can just kind of like go
Nice.
off that and start talking about that a little bit. Like, what do you think about this whole ECS for all initiative and some of the things that they're talking about in the roadmap talk and the new animation system, world builder? Like, is there anything that kind of particularly sticks out to you?
I mean, the whole thing about integrating game objects and entities, I think that is really awesome. I mean, the basically right now you have to decide, okay, this I'm going to do with game object, this I'm going to do with dots. But after you integrate those, it will be much easier to basically have some game object code and then easily refactor it to work with dots, make some super fast jobs and so on, because the whole thing will already be backed by an entity. So without you having to do something specifically, you will already have that connection. So I do think that is going to help quite a lot at basically helping you build dots the way that Unity themselves wants you to use dots, which is basically how you're not supposed to make game 100% with dots, but rather build games using game objects like Unity has done for over a decade at this point. Do that, and then for the parts that need it, you can refactor some things and make it into dots, which right now that refactor involves quite a lot of things. You basically have to recreate a second world, but after that integration happens, that should be much easier. So I do think that is going to be a really excellent benefit. It's when it comes to refactoring old code to take advantage, that should help quite a lot. And of course, in terms of those systems like the world building and the animation, that is another thing that I really love about dots that I think is really awesome, which is how even developers who don't directly use dots, by using those systems, you're going to use dots in background. So you're going to take in all of the benefits that dots has without having to individually specifically go for it. So I think that is going to basically improve the whole engine as a whole without developers having to specifically go after dots. So yeah, honestly, what they showed for the roadmap, I'm really excited. I think it sounds really awesome. The only negative is that it's only like 2 years away, but yeah.
Yeah, it's like there's so many exciting things on the horizon, and it's like, ooh, I really want to see what all this stuff looks like. But yeah, I mean, right now I think Dots is in a pretty good state. Like like
Yeah.
you say, there's some things that you definitely still have to do on the game object side, and it can be a little bit messy sometimes, kind of going back and forth between the two. But I know that's something that you use quite a bit in your course is like kind of doing things. You're like, there's no reason to do this on the ECS side.
Yeah.
Like, let's just do this on the game object side because it, works completely well. And yeah, so have you find that kind of some difficulties kind of like almost linking the ECS and game object sides?
For the whole part, it's actually relatively simple. I mean, once you understand the basics for how dots works, it actually becomes much more understandable. Like in the beginning, it does seem like a completely alien language. Everything is so different. But once you understand the basics, it is actually relatively similar. I mean, you've got the entity manager, you've got entities, you've got components, and you can easily access those from the game object side or do a bunch of queries on the dot side. So once you know that, you can very easily grab data from one side or the other and do a bunch of things. So yeah, there are many systems, like for example, UI systems, manager systems, where you don't really need extreme performance. So it is super easy to just use just regular game objects like everyone's already used to, and simply write some code that interacts from those game objects, interacts with the dots world, grab some data from that, does some kind of operation, something. So yeah, it's awesome how you don't have to, because in the beginning when they first announced dots, they were kind of going for, okay, you either make game objects or you make dots. That's it, one or the other. But I think it's really awesome how in the 5 years they've been developing dots, it's really awesome how they came to the current state, which really encourages more of a hybrid workflow. So you can use one for one part, use another for the other. And I do think that's a much better option as opposed to trying to force things into dots that are really not meant for dots. So things like UI, game managers, and so on, really just keep those as game objects. And yeah, it's thankfully it's really easy to work from one to the other one, and I think that's really great.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think the whole unified transform system is going to be really great. Like now we'll be able to actually have game objects and entities be able to easily reference each other and kind of exist in the same transform hierarchies. So
it's also going to be interesting to see how they talk about mixing mono behavior components and dots components, putting them all under the same thing. So that is going to be quite interesting to see how they handle that whole thing.
I definitely have a lot of questions about how things are practically going to play out, but I feel like I'm feeling pretty confident in the teams. They seem like they know what they're doing. And actually, so we've been kind of talking a little bit about your course. So why don't you give like a brief introduction into kind of what you've been doing as far as your dots course goes, and I can pull up a little video here to play as you're talking.
Sure, yeah. So I've been working on the dots course. I mean, that's something that I was planning to do for several years now. I was basically just waiting for dots 1.0 to finally hit. So earlier this year, when they finally released dots 1.0, that's when I started properly researching for this course, trying to figure out what game do I make, how do I teach it, and so on. And yeah, right now the course is out with about 16 lectures, I think, nowadays. I'm currently working on the next update, so there are still a bunch more things to come, but the course as it is already teaches quite a lot. It starts with the absolute basics. I did try my hardest to make the learning curve as smooth as possible. So start off really basic, like what is an entity, what is a component, what is a system, how does one interact with the other one, how do you interact systems between them, how do entities interact, and so on. So yeah, I tried very hard to make a really nice, smooth learning curve. And so far, thankfully, the feedback has been really positive. So despite dots, like I was saying, despite dots seeming very complicated from the outset, if you don't know about it, once you learn the basics, it actually becomes quite a bit more understandable, quite a bit easier. And yeah, this course has been my attempt to try to teach that, because it's a thing that doesn't really work in a 20-minute video. So making a proper course with a lot of detail, covering everything as much as possible, that has been personally, it has been a really great experience for me as a research project. And yeah, thankfully people have really enjoyed learning about it. Nice.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, you're building out this basically real-time strategy type game, and you kind of have a lot of the standard, game mechanics. And I mean, I think you do a really good job at introducing these topics and kind of, building them up over time, introducing more ECS concepts. And, I was saying to you a little bit earlier before we went live, you kind of show a lot of the, common mistakes that, people who are kind of newer to dots and ECS, might end up making, and, say, okay, if you're seeing this error, this is, likely what it's going to be, or, if this isn't updating, this is probably why. So, I think it's really good in that sense.
Yeah, there are a few of those quirks. I try to include as many of them as possible. And yeah, hopefully that helps make the learning process as easy as I can make it. That's the goal, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, if you do want to check out his course, I do have a link to that. I think it's just the first link in the description of this video here. So if you want to go ahead and check that out, you can do it there. Yeah, I've been really enjoying going through it myself,
Nice. Thank
even
you.
though a lot of the stuff is, kind of familiar to me, but I'm learning like, smaller, different ways to go about things. And I actually did learn one completely new thing, which I think I hadn't seen before, is when you were creating like the blob assets for your animation
Oh yeah.
system, there was the, what is it, like the add blob asset inside your
Oh
Baker
yeah. Adding
scripts?
the reference. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was something that I hadn't came across before. So that was,
Oh really? Oh, I
yeah.
think if you don't add that, you end up with memory leak. So I think that is pretty important. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it it makes sense. But yeah, I do kind of want to talk a little bit about your animation setup real quick, because I do think that that was kind of quite clever how you came up with that animation solution. So, of course, you wanted to have these characters be animated within your
Yeah. Of
game. You didn't want
course.
these just kind of static characters sliding around. So, and again, Unity ECS doesn't have like a native animation option, right within the editor. So, what were kind of like some of the approaches that you were considering, and how did you ultimately come to the solution that you created?
I mean, the main thing that usually people, if you search for it, the main thing that you're going to find is some kind of some kind of vertex animation. So basically, bake the animation coordinates into a texture, and then read that texture on the GPU and use that to move some vertices. That is usually the main way that people do it, and that was the main way that I thought about it. But yeah, that would involve shader programming, which is quite a bit complex, quite a bit tricky. So yeah, whenever I do something for a course, I have to think not just can I do this, but can I do this and then teach people how to do this. And yeah, when it comes to shaders, I'm not a huge expert. So even though that was the obvious choice, I had to then look at something different. And then I thought, yeah, why not do some simple, similar to sprite sheet animations, which works really great in 2D. So why not make it work in 3D? And yeah, that's when I went doing some research, how to use swap a mesh. Turns out it is extremely simple. You basically just
Right.
register a mesh, change an ID on one component. That's it. It swaps automatically and works really great. So yeah, once I figured that out, was just building upon that system and yeah, basically making it so it's kind of like stop motion. So got a bunch of meshes and then swap them every frame and so on, and kind of creates an animation. And yeah, I think it does end up looking pretty nice, pretty relatively unique. So yeah, I was quite happy with the that system. Took quite a bit of research, but yeah, I think it looks quite nice in the end.
Yeah, and even though it is kind of like that more flip book stop motion
Yeah,
style, I think it like fits the, like blocky
yeah,
characters pretty
exactly.
well. So it works out pretty well. And like you say, it is extremely performant because you're literally just like,
Yeah,
telling the GPU, hey, render this mesh at this position. So it's like not really like, any crazy performance overhead really, but
yeah, exactly. Yeah, thankfully, changing a mesh is super simple. So yeah, when I did my research, finding all the ECS symbols and so on, yeah, I saw okay, this method is going to work, and it's pretty simple. So it's something that I can teach, works well, and yeah, came out quite nice. Yeah,
yeah, I quite like it. And you, yeah, get into some really like actually in-depth topics in there, like, going pretty deep into using blob assets for
yeah,
really
yeah,
interesting things and
yeah.
not
That
really
was
like,
definitely tricky in terms of research, figuring out how to because blob assets. That's one part of dots that is still quite a bit confusing, quite a bit complex. Requires quite a lot of steps to properly build it, properly store it, and so on. So yeah, that was a that was a very tricky one, but in the end, it works really great. So it's a great way to read data from multiple places and do it super fast. And yeah,
yeah,
a
definitely.
really interesting feature of dots. It is.
Yeah. And actually, I think like way long ago in some of the earlier days of ECS, you did a tutorial on blob assets. And I remember following that like as I was learning dots myself. Um, do you remember that one that you did?
I'm
The
not sure, but I do know that I made a ton of dot tutorials back in day, back in version 0.15, 0.17. Yeah, I made so many things, and yeah, the API was so different. Everything
very
was
different.
so much more complex, so much more confusing. So yeah, looking at that, that's 1.0 is really quite magical, quite much more simple. So yeah, they definitely did a really great work these past 5 years, turning the API from something that was so confusing, such a massive code, so much boilerplate to now being quite understandable. Yeah,
Yeah.
looking at
It
that comparison definitely does show how much they improved upon it.
Yeah. It is quite interesting though, like how much like with all the source generation that they use, like it actually ends up being, running off of a lot of the same code that was like we were writing way back in the earlier
Yeah.
days of ECS, but now we just can write it in a much cleaner and simpler way. And just with
Oh,
the
yeah.
code generation, it just, generates into all that code that we need.
Yeah, the code generation is quite magical. How you can write something simple, then background makes all the confusing thing, but you don't have to worry about it. Just write the simple thing and everything is going to work.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And then yeah, even with your animation system, you went like pretty in depth into creating like a pretty crazy like baker system and everything.
Yeah.
So I know you were kind of mentioning in the video that that was like a little bit of a problem to quite a difficult problem to solve.
It was, yeah. Yeah, it's the whole thing about how baking works and how that is the one thing that has tripped me up a few times while working on dots, is basically how things work very different if you have the subscene open versus the subscene closed. Which
Right.
then,
Yeah.
if you make a build, by default, the subscene is going to be closed. So there are some
Exactly. Yeah.
bugs that don't happen if the subscene is open, but do happen if it is closed. So yeah, that is one thing that has tripped me up quite a while. All of a sudden, I think everything is working. Then I close the subscene, and because the whole thing runs in different ways, all of a sudden everything breaks. So yeah, there was quite a lot of things that I had to learn how to do differently, and yeah, quite a lot of research. And on that one specifically, that one, Danny actually helped me out quite a bit. I was at Unite, and I asked him specifically,
Okay.
how do I solve this problem? What do I do? And he was the one who taught me about
The guy
how you
got
can
you.
create additional entities, how you can then basically put the mesh directly on there and let the baking system do its thing, and then grab the data from there. He was the one who told me the high-level overview for how to make that. So yeah, that was super helpful.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's yeah, a lot of interesting topics to learn and all that. Um
And someone asking, Danny the banana guy? No, Danny the dots guy.
yeah, no. Danny is the one of our co-hosts, regular co-hosts on
Yeah.
this show here on the Hot Path show. Um I was going to ask you one other thing related to that. Shoot, I don't remember.
Yeah, the dots animation system, that one had quite a lot of complexity, quite a lot of things. But yeah, thankfully in the end, everything works pretty nice. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, again, I think it's a good solution, and it's something that you can do right within Unity.
Yeah.
While we're waiting for their amazing, complex animation system and
yeah.
everything. So let's see. And then, yeah, I want to talk to you a little bit about like tycoon and management style games, because these are, you've made a couple of these games in the
Yeah.
past. So, has there been kind of like any limitations that you maybe have ran into in the past when you've been creating some of these games? And, maybe
Yeah.
now that you're kind of more involved in dots and ECS, is this something you might want to, kind of revisit a little bit more?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the main issue with those games always the same thing. It's always the limitation of having units on screen and so on. Like I remember it was on Battleground Tycoon, which I'm pretty sure if you had more than 300 guests on the park, all of a sudden everything would start to very slowly break down. I mean, because that was 300 characters, each of them with their own custom animation system, which I made as performant as possible. But still, when you got 300 characters, each of them with like 9 body parts, all moving, doing individual animations,
Right.
plus all the systems of all the various parks, all the various things. Yeah, at that point, it gets something where it can't really work too much. But of course, it can't work too much because the whole thing was running just on the main thread. I think maybe I did the pathfinding multi-thread. Yeah, maybe I did that one, but everything else, all the animation code, all running on the main thread, all the logic for all the various places, various buildings, all of that on the main thread. So yeah, if I could have dots with knowledge that I have right now, I could definitely refactor that game and increase the guest count by quite a huge amount. Because yeah, it does sound quite a bit. And once again, something really awesome that I constantly tell people, which is how in dots, you don't have to make the game fully with dots. So I'm pretty sure I could go back to that game and basically just refactor just the animation system, just that one to use.
Maybe
not even entities.
Some things.
Yeah, exactly. Just the job system and burst. And just with that would probably give quite a huge performance boost.
Yeah, no, that is a really great option. Yeah. And again, I like how, things are a little bit more interchangeable. You don't necessarily have to use just entities, just jobs and all that. Like, you can pick and choose a little bit, but of course they, work really well all together. So
yeah, if you put them all together, yeah, that's when you get the truly insane performance benefits. It still drives me crazy how you can have the exact same code and run literally 100 times faster just if you use entities, jobs, and burst. It is insane how same code runs 1x faster, 100x faster. Yeah, it's quite
Yeah.
insane how they made that
Yeah.
work.
So I know you're kind of doing a lot of stuff with your course and the channel and all that now, but is there like would you want to actually go back to some of your games and maybe remaster them or like work on some do you have any ideas for some new games, some cool game ideas that you might want to work on?
That's a great question, and my answer is it always depends on time.
Yeah, yeah.
Basically, yes, I would love to do all of that, but yeah, finding time to do everything is always super tricky. And like, yeah, like I was saying, I would love to go back to some of those games, remaster them. I mean, I still have the source code, so I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be impossible to like upgrade the Unity version to Unity 6, start using dots, entities, jobs, bursts, and so on. That would definitely be doable. But yeah, the time is always the main limitation. So yeah, trying to do everything at the same time doesn't quite work. So yeah, basically
Right.
this year I'm focusing more on the courses. So I was working on my C# course, then on my dots course, whilst also trying to make regular videos on the channel. So this year I'm not even trying to make any game. I did Dinky Gardens last year,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I
yeah.
built it over 7 months, and it was an an insane amount of work trying to make a game and trying to keep the channel alive at the same time. That
Right.
was definitely
Yeah.
an insane thing. So yeah, this year I focus more specifically on that. But yeah, next year I very much want to get back to. There was a game that I announced before Dinky Gardens, which was, yeah, I guess it was like 2 years ago
Yeah, I
that I
think it was at
announced.
the
Yeah,
the
Total
Unite
World
in when we were
Liberation.
at Montreal, right? It was kind of
Yeah,
around that time, yeah.
yeah, that was like, yeah, about 2 years ago. Which so yeah, and next year I very much would love to get back that project. I mean, that is meant to be like a turn-based strategy game on an open world that is a persistent open world. So with lots of objects moving around on every turn, lots of logic. So I do think that is one that will benefit quite a lot from dot CCS and so on, making all of that turn logic for all of those objects in the entire world. I think that is going to help quite a bit to make that whole thing performance. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to trying to use dots uh, in an actual production game next year. So yeah, that should be an interesting challenge.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think there's going to be a lot for you to have to re-architect for that game, or do you think you'd be able to kind
Uh,
of like integrate dots again, kind of like you were saying, within those specific features that maybe
yeah,
need
exactly.
those kind of performance boosts?
Yeah, I think for that it should be relatively straightforward to. I mean, when I wrote that code base, I was trying my best to actually that game first started on a course that I made, my turn-based strategy course, which then I took the final state of that, and then I started building the game off of that. So because that, I did make sure to structure the code as cleanly as possible, everything nicely separated. So I do think it should be relatively straightforward for me to get back to that code base and basically just take some systems like there's one where the game has some automation elements. So there are like items that get crafted here, then get moved grid by grid position. So I'm pretty sure I can take that, just make that into a job and have the whole thing run super fast. Even if I have tons of items, it should be really fast. So yeah, I do think thanks to how I wrote the code back then with as few dependencies as possible, thanks to that, yeah, I do think refactoring should hopefully not be too much of an issue. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 definitely. And yeah, now that you've been doing a lot of like the dot stuff, of course, with the course and all that, like, and of course, we talk a lot about performance and how amazing the performance is and how cool it is to see these really high numbers and everything. But one of the things that I like a lot about the dots and ECS workflows, just kind of like the architecture. There's just like interesting ways that you can kind of structure things. So do you kind of like that data oriented design architecture as well? And like, is it something that you've kind of like started to prefer over a more typical game object workflow, or you're like, both have their pros and cons kind of thing?
Yeah, definitely both have their pros and cons. I mean, there are a lot of places where, yeah, that separation of data and systems, that makes quite a lot of sense. That makes things quite a bit simpler. But also sometimes I'm like, okay, this entity has some kind of enemy component. I just want to call a function on that enemy component to take some damage or
That's
something like
fair.
that.
That's fair.
So yeah, there are definitely pros and cons to things. If things are super nicely separated, then yeah, it does help quite a bit. But there are some scenarios where it does help to have data and logic in the same place and be able to interact with them as one logical unit. So yeah, for those places, object
Yeah,
oriented
especially
still makes
especially like
sense.
when you're prototyping something out. Like if you're just making like a
Yeah,
game jam game, it's easy to say like, oh hey, this is an enemy. Apply damage. It's
yeah,
just right there. You don't have to like create some whole like event system or something
Exactly.
that's handles all these things in a nice way. But
Yeah, events is one of the main things that is still super tricky. Like I did a ton of research to figure out the best way, the way that I end up building it in the course, and I'm still not 100% in love with that idea. I mean, it works, but yeah, I'm still like when it comes to events, I still much prefer normal C# events because I can just attach a listener, then invoke the event, and everybody hears about the event. Whereas in Dots, since it's that oriented, can really have a direct connection. So I have to set some kind of boolean to true, then at the end of the frame, read that value, and then do something with it. So basically, when it comes to events, it does become quite a bit more complex, quite a bit more tricky, whereas in object-oriented, it is so much straightforward. So yeah, pros and cons, it really is.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we actually did have a question that I highlighted from a little while ago, kind of
Nice.
related to events. So, do either of you think that a standard event system would be good to add to Dots? If you always have to make one, then that point is points
Yeah.
to needing a standard.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I'm pretty sure every single game, every single type of entity, object, whatever you have in your game, is always going to have some kind of event. There's always something that's going to happen to that entity, whether it is taking damage, gaining experience, something like that. Yeah, I think events, I can't imagine a game that exists without a single event. So yeah, if events is something that every single game has to have, then yeah, it would be nice to have some kind of standard for it. So yeah, I wonder if that is going to, I mean, that's one interesting thing about Dots is how Dots is still very much in the beginning. Like 1.0 just came out just very recently. So now over the next few years, as people start to use more and more, eventually more best practices, more standards are going to come out. And yeah, hopefully over time there will come some nice standards for how to handle events and all those things. So because yeah, like I said, the research that I did, the option that I came up with, it does work, but I'm not in love with it. So if someone finds a better way, definitely do tell me. I want to know.
Yeah. No, I think there maybe is like a forum post in the Unity forums kind of talking about some different approaches to, doing data-oriented events. So there's, I think, some interesting things in there.
Yeah.
One of the, I think myself and Tobias, we kind of have different approaches that we like to take for these types of events. One thing that I've kind of been doing a little bit is just kind of having like a entity interaction dynamic buffer, where I can kind of just like store, all these essentially just like, base interactions where it's like, hey, this entity interacted with this entity, and then, have a Boolean if it's been handled or not. And then, I can have systems basically run through that dynamic buffer and then, do different things based off of those events.
Do you make just one main entity or one entity per event?
So basically, like any entity that can like interact with other entities, they're all going to have their own dynamic buffer.
Okay.
And then, so then I can kind of like add different components to that same
Okay.
entity where I say like, damage on interaction. So then, if it has that damage on interaction, then it'll go through that dynamic buffer and then it applies damage to all those target entities. And then you can do, other things where you say like, want to, play a sound effect on collision or, heal this entity on collision kind of thing. So, it works for, attacks and items and, just really kind of like anything that you want to, again, have one entity interact with another entity.
And then how do you reset those events? You do them at the end of the frame?
Yeah. So then at the end of the frame, then I'll basically have like a system that says, like handle all the events, and then it just kind of like goes through and then just changes that Boolean flag on there.
Sure. Yeah.
And then, yeah. So then again, you can kind of like keep that list. So if you want to have like, an attack, you don't want it to like apply the attack every frame that it's like colliding with it. So you can kind of like, check that list and see if that same entity already is in that dynamic buffer, and then you can kind of ignore it.
Right. Yeah. That is a valid option. Yeah. I did think about using dynamic buffers, and yeah, that can work. So yeah, right now there are lots of options. I'm curious to see which one will end up being the best practice when we look back a year from now, something like that.
Right. Yeah.
Should be interesting.
Yeah. And then, yeah, even Tobias, he kind of showed off more of like a list-based approach where he kind of is like queuing things up onto a stack and then kind of like goes through it and handles those. So yeah, I think there's, definitely some interesting options. And yeah, would be interesting to see if there kind of ends up being some standard approach, or if again it's more just kind of Unity is giving us a lot of tools and we can kind of do whatever we want to.
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, so as far as like your course goes, you mentioned that you're still kind of like adding new lectures to it. So, what are kind of some of the things that people can expect to be added within the near future? And are there any kind of like, stretch goals as far as, things that you would like to add? I know we were kind of briefly talking about, before we went live that, it's an RTS game. There's so many things that you can do, so many
Oh,
ways that you
yeah.
can take it. So, yeah, where are things looking in the near to long term with this course?
Yeah, so right now I'm currently working on the next update. So I've been working on that for the past few weeks, and this is a pretty big one. It's the one adding full field pathfinding. So that is quite a tricky one. I mean, first of all, it involves creating a grid system, which usually is something that I've done hundreds of times. So it's something that I can do very easily. But when it comes to making it data oriented, it does require changing quite a lot of things. So yeah, figuring out how to make a grid system with data oriented design, no objects, nothing like that. That was quite tricky, but it came out quite nicely. And yeah, then using that grid system to implement full field pathfinding, which has been, yeah, it's been an interesting challenge. I mean, I've used A-star pathfinding several times in the past, but this is the first time that I'm working with full field, which is usually a great thing when you have tons of units. So for this RTS game, it did seem like the perfect type of pathfinding to go in. Even though at the same time, on those lectures, I do mention how when it comes to RTS games, you can definitely use A-star and use full field. Either one's like, for example, Age of Empires, as far as I know, uses A-star pathfinding, and it does work quite well. And it is a game from very old, so technically you can make A-star pathfinding work very fast. So that does work. And on the other hand, you also have full field pathfinding with games like Supreme Commander, which does have a huge scale with tons of units, and because that full field does have quite a lot of benefits. So yeah, I'm currently working on the next update, adding all of those. So it should be like, I don't know, 15, 16 lectures, something like that. So I'm currently recording and validating a bunch of things. So yeah, it's been a very interesting challenge. So yeah, hopefully in the near future should have that update out. Yeah.
Nice.
And yeah, beyond that, yeah, I got a giant list of things that I still want to cover. So yeah, things like resource gathering, like adding a minimap, adding fog of war. That one is going to be an interesting one. Then adding like horde attacks, so like spawning a ton of zombies and having them attack. Because like one of the main inspirations for the game design that I'm going for is the game They Are Billions, which is basically an RTS defense game. So it spawns a ton of zombies. So I felt that was definitely the perfect genre to try to go for making a dots game. So yeah, need to implement a horde system. Then still got to look into sound effects and all kinds of things. That is something that I have not used in dots at all. I have no idea how dots works with sound, so that is going to be an interesting research area. And yeah, still quite a bunch more things. So yeah, in the future, still quite a bit left to go.
Awesome. Yeah, a lot of exciting stuff. And yeah, sounds like you kind of already answered this, but do you have a favorite RTS that you take inspirations from?
I mean, specifically inspirations for this course, yeah, the main one is the game There Are Billions. Really awesome game. It includes, I actually don't remember, I think they used a custom engine. I think they did, because the game does have a huge scale. Like you get thousands of zombies, all of them attacking at the same time, and it's really quite insane how the whole thing works. So yeah, for this game, that is very much a direct inspiration. And yeah, before, of course, as a kid, I played a ton of Red Alert 2. That was
so
spent
good.
quite a lot of time. Age of Empires, that was awesome. AoE 2, that was so cool. Then I also spent quite a lot of time in Empire Earth playing with a bunch of friends. That was also a really awesome one. So yeah, it's RTS games definitely been something that I've always enjoyed quite a bit. Yeah. The only one that I never got into was StarCraft. For some reason, I don't know. It seemed a bit too hardcore. I don't know. Whereas all the other games I can play for fun, StarCraft seemed like it was very serious, very competitive. You got to have like an APM of like 200 to be able to play the game. So yeah, for some reason, I never quite got into StarCraft.
Yeah, no, I played StarCraft like pretty casually. Like my friends and I would mostly play like the custom games. Like, people make these things, like Nexus Wars and Marine Arena
Nice.
and stuff like that, where it's just a lot more casual, and you're kind of just like, spamming a bunch of units, and you don't have to like, get really into the nitty gritty. But I actually went to college with somebody who like was a like very highly ranked competitive StarCraft player.
Oh wow.
And just like watching him play was insane. He was like all over his keyboard and like with the mouse and everything. I'm just like so confused at what he was doing. And it's like I thought I knew this game pretty
Oh
decently, but
yeah.
it's like no, not even close.
Yeah, that's a completely different level. It's quite insane.
Lego Crystal Alien Conflict was an insane RTS browser-based game. I don't even think I've heard of that one.
I never heard of it. It's
I
like an
was
official Lego
pretty
game?
big into the Lego games.
Okay.
I'll have to look that up.
I mean, there were also a bunch of awesome like Warcraft mods. So I did also spend quite a bunch of time playing those. I remember, I mean, I did spend quite a lot of time playing the original Dota mod. That was also really awesome. That was really cool. And one of the characters that I really liked, oh crap, I can't remember the name, like Meepo something, Meepo, something like that. It was basically like a character where you control like 5 different characters at the same time. And if one of them dies, then the whole thing dies. So yeah, that was a really tricky character. But yeah, it's for fans of strategy games, that was a really awesome character. So yeah, playing Dota, the Warcraft mod, and playing a bunch of those mods was also really cool. Yeah.
Awesome. See, we got a little shout out to some Lego racing. That was a big one for me, definitely.
Nice.
Let's see. So, yeah, I mean, is there any other, I mean, it sounds like, yeah, there's a bunch of things that you want to be kind of like, adding to this, course. Is this something that you kind of like, would want to like kind of build more of like a RTS game in the future? Or, is this something that you're just kind of like, again, mostly focusing on the course right now?
Mostly focusing on the course right now, but anytime I finish a course, I always think to myself, oh, I could expand upon this, make a proper game, something like that. So yeah, that goes back into having too many ideas than time. That is always the big issue. But yeah, I definitely would love to make a small mini project using dots, trying to use dots in production. I think that would be really cool. So that is definitely something that I would love to experiment. But yeah, not sure, because especially RTS games, those are a very tricky genre to market. So that one can be a little bit tricky. But using those same things, making more of a defense RTS, that might work a little bit better. So yeah, I mean, there are definitely quite a lot of ways you can expand upon it. When you have tons of units doing interaction, those units can be whatever you want. Those interactions can be whatever you want. So yeah, I'm a big fan of taking some idea, building upon it, and yeah, who knows? Right now, definitely just focus on getting the course to the finish line, getting it a nice, complete thing from start to finish. And then, yeah, I guess I will see afterwards.
Yeah, definitely. Or even, well, hello. I just wanted to pull this up. I thought make a physics-based RTS game. That could be pretty sweet, right?
That's interesting, yeah. Yeah, that would be interesting. Although actually, when I did a little stress test in my game, it seemed like the physics was like the main issue. I don't remember now what it was. Like I did a stress test. I think it was maybe just doing a bunch of overlap spheres to find the targets. I think that was the main thing that was limiting. So yeah, I would be definitely curious to see physics-based RTS with dots. How performant is that? How many things can you have collisions at the same time, doing queries at the same time? Definitely would be curious to do a little stress test on that area. Yeah.
Yeah, that is one thing that I had kind of noticed, and I think Unity has kind of said as much, that the physics system, it isn't necessarily like much more performant than the regular Unity PhysX system, especially when you're kind of like scaling things up, I guess. And I've definitely heard some people have some problems when it particularly comes to like performance on mobile and standalone VR devices as well. So yeah, it is a little bit unfortunate that is. And again, it will be really interesting to see, how things look when Unity kind of unifies game objects and entities and all that. And, what that kind of physics system looks like. Is there still going to be a little bit of a split there?
Have you tried using Havoc? Have you done any comparison between those two to see?
I haven't. Yeah, I kind of want to get back to doing some Havoc stuff, but yeah, Havoc seems to be, I don't know. I should, experiment with it a little bit more, but yeah, Havoc is still a thing. It is only available for Unity Pro subscriptions right now. So yeah, it is kind of limited, but it is a little bit different because they say it's like a stateful physics system
Yeah.
versus how the dots physics is a stateless system. So there are kind of some differences there.
Yeah, I haven't used it since like version 0.17 when it was just a drop down menu and you just swap and everything apparently worked. So yeah, I'm definitely
Yeah,
curious to
yeah.
do a comparison.
I noticed in your courses, you're using the physics system. You're just kind of using the regular Unity physics components. You're not using any of the custom authoring ones. Was that kind of a conscious decision, or you're more just kind of like kind of going with that workflow?
Yeah,
Or
just keep things as simple as possible. So yeah, just using the normal game object process, just add a box highlighter and the whole thing gets converted into something. And yeah, but yeah, that is definitely one area where you could improve things by quite a bit. So yeah.
have you used the custom physics authoring stuff much?
Not really. I've done some research, but I haven't really used it. And yeah, also the collectors also did a bunch of research, but I haven't really used it. So
Hmm.
that's another area where I might get some performance on all those fine target queries that I'm doing. So yeah, definitely still plenty of room for lots of improvements.
Yeah, yeah. Collectors are it's a fun thing to play around with,
Yeah.
and they're a little cool optimization that you can do. But you have I don't know if I've seen maybe that part in the tutorial, but you have been doing some stuff with like overlap sphere queries and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, that's the main way to find targets. Just do an overlap sphere around the unit, find all the colliders around it, and see, okay, are they an enemy unit? Then see, make it a target, and so on. So yeah, definitely using physics queries is something that I use all the time, both in dots and outside of dots. I find that to be always super helpful for finding objects that are nearby some kind of position instead of cycling through an entire list. No, just do a physics query around an area, find everything around it. So yeah, I do tend to use those quite a bit. Yeah.
Have you ever kind of like experimented at all with like creating your own like spatial hierarchies, like any kind of like quad trees or oct trees, things like that?
Yeah, I did actually do something like that, like back in the early stages of Dot. So I'm pretty sure I still have a tutorial somewhere. Like I think I called it a quadrant system. So
Oh
yeah, that
yeah,
was
yeah,
with
yeah.
like
Actually, I think I remember that. Yeah,
yeah, that was in like Dot 0.1, and yeah, it
yeah.
did work quite well. I did use that, and it does help significantly to make sure that you only update certain parts of the world instead of updating the whole thing. So yeah, that is another great way to find a bit of extra performance. Basically, just look for the entities that you only need to look for, and not look for all the other ones. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And actually, yeah, this kind of ties off that a little bit. So the question is, doesn't the physics system have to do cycling through the entire list then? So the physics system does kind of have its own,
Yeah.
spatial querying type hierarchy. I think they use like a BVH tree or something like that, if I remember correctly. But there is kind of some, efficiency gains where you're not doing the whole like, n squared
Yeah.
problem where, every entity has to check against
Mhm.
every other entity, but you can kind of narrow it down to like a specific area of the map.
Oh yeah, yeah. So that's why it should be interesting to see how they improve that over time. I mean, that is part of the reason that I was saying a while ago, which is how it's really awesome how as we go into the future and they start building more things on top of dots, even without using dots yourself, you're still going to benefit from those improvements. So yeah, it's going to be interesting as they improve all the core packages of dots, like continue improving the job system, continue improving Unity physics, and so on. Then all of a sudden, even if you don't use your own custom manually created quadrant system or spatial query and so on, still in the background, it is still going to be used something like that. So it is still going to be quite improving. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing I want to talk to you a little bit about was like networking. Have you looked into like netcode for entities much? And is that something that like
Uh,
interests you to create a little project with or anything?
I have not, but yeah, the goal is first finish the course in single player, and then afterwards go do some research on that and try to see just how easy or difficult it is to basically refactor the game afterwards and try to make it work with netcode. So yeah, I've gone through the documentation a little bit just to see roughly how it is, but yeah, haven't really used it too much. So yeah, have you used it? Do you know how difficult it is to then take something and make it into multiplayer?
Yeah, so I did, of course, did the big like netcode for entities course tutorial on
Yeah,
my YouTube channel, but that was kind of made from the ground up with networking and multiplayer in mind. So I haven't really built out some like single player game and
Mm.
then converted that to a multiplayer. Although I do remember there was a team at GDC, I think earlier this year, who basically did kind of take that path where um, I think they still kind of like had the idea that they wanted to do multiplayer eventually. So they kind of built out the game
Oh,
single
okay.
player, but with some considerations of, this might be something that only needs to run on the server, and this might be something that only needs to run on the client. So they kind of like had some of those separations in kind of their systems, from like an earlier stage in development. But again, they built out this game fully single player, and then when they were ready to switch that over, they were basically just said, hey, all the input
Right.
systems, these are going to run just on the client, and the same thing with rendering. And then we're going to have certain systems run only on the server, and then the bulk of the systems actually end up running on both. So it was kind of interesting. It sounds like that is absolutely a doable path. So
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to doing some research on that because I mean I did use their other multiplayer tool, Netcode for Game Objects, and I did really enjoy working with that one. So yeah, I'm very curious to see Netcode for Entities, how complex or easy it is by looking at the documentation as a very high level overview. It did seem to be relatively straightforward. So yeah, definitely looking forward to trying that out.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of interesting things, and kind of capabilities that it gives us. Like especially, Unity says they kind of want this to be for their kind of competitive multiplayer games,
Oh
and I
yeah.
think there are a lot of like really good tools that enable some of those competitive type games and everything. So yeah, really cool.
Nice.
Um, Looks like Bonte said that is what we do. um, let's see. Yeah, and of course, if you do have any questions for Hugo, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we can go ahead and get to those. But are there any other kind of like things within dots that you maybe haven't experimented with too much that you are kind of something like that's something that you really want to get to at some point?
Good question. I mean, the main one is really netcode for entities. Yeah, I definitely want to look into that after I finish. So yeah, other than that, I don't know. I think I've used quite a lot of things right now. I mean, blob assets was one big thing that I hadn't really used, but then when I did the research for the animation system, I did use that quite a bit. So yeah, I guess the collectors on the physics system, that is something that I haven't used too much. They do seem quite interesting. So yeah, I think by now I've used quite a lot of things. I mean, thanks to the animation system and how I asked Danny for help and how he told me he basically told me to create a baking system. So I also created a custom baking system. Also looked into that. So yeah, I guess different worlds. I guess that is one thing that I haven't really used at all. Everything works on just one world. Haven't really experimented with different worlds because wasn't there. I think there was like a dots physics sample, something like that, where some kind of like snooker game where it basically had one world that was existing, so the ball was like
Oh
here,
yeah, yeah,
but then
yeah.
it was simulating the physics on the other world, so the ball was here and it was showing like a ghost of the thing.
Right, like
Yeah,
I think it would, pre-simulate it and,
yeah,
like, show where the
exactly.
ball would end up, basically.
Yeah, yeah. I think
Yeah.
playing with different worlds, there are definitely some interesting things you can
That
do with
actually
that.
is a good use case for multiple worlds other than kind
Yeah,
of the primary one, which is, like, for networking and
yeah.
multiplayer
Having a
stuff,
server.
which
Yeah,
yeah, which I think that actually ends up being a pretty good, setup, having multiple worlds, for the server and client and, each of the different clients, I guess.
yeah. Everything is much more separated, which yeah does help quite a bit.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that one. I should go check that one out because that actually is like
Hmm.
a good, interesting use case for
Yeah.
simulating something on like a different world where it's like not kind of your live gameplay world, but you can still kind of like get information from that.
Yeah, and I guess another thing, which I guess not, well, I guess semi-officially, but not, it's the have you played around with all the various packages that exist on the SSR? Like, for example, there is the I don't know what it's called, like the player controller package, which used to be a third-party package, but then Unity bought it. So, like the
Yeah,
Dots
yeah, yeah,
one,
yeah.
and that one is now
Yeah, the
apparently
character controller.
semi-native. Have you
Yeah,
used
yeah,
that
yeah.
one?
It's built in and actually just of like as of a couple weeks ago, it's finally no longer like an experimental or preview package. Like it's
Oh,
a
nice.
full, yeah, available package now. Yeah, I played around with it when it still was a asset on the asset store, um, and used it here and there a little bit, as it's been kind of like a Unity native thing. So that would be
Yeah.
another thing to kind of use. I think Tobias is maybe working on a project right now that uses that character
Oh,
controller.
nice. And you also did the video where you tried out the animations ones. So the ones that there are two main ones. One uses vertex animation, the other I don't know if it does or doesn't, something like that. And
Yeah, so the GPU ECS animation baker
yeah.
one, kind of does like it basically bakes all the vertex animations down into like a texture, and then it can kind of like sample that texture to find out where all the actually I don't think it's a vertex, it might be bone based. I can't
Oh,
remember, but yeah, so there's that one, and then the Rukonka is the
yeah.
other kind of big one. That one's really interesting because it integrates with Mechanim, Unity's built-in animation
Oh,
system, and so it actually was pretty easy to get up and running and use animation events and stuff. So that was
oh,
pretty neat.
really?
Yeah,
But in the background, it bakes all into dots, entities, dots rendering, and so on.
yeah.
Oh, nice. Yeah, because I've also had some comments on the course, people asking me about those assets, and I haven't yet used them. So yeah, I'm definitely planning after I finish the main portion, definitely look into those assets, do a quick review, getting started video, something like that, because yeah, they do seem quite useful. I mean, since right now you don't have any animations, if you want to do animations, but you don't want to do like the method that I use, the sprite sheet animations. If you want instead to do humanoid animations, then yeah, those two assets do seem quite interesting. So I definitely do look forward to researching those. And yeah, if you say that it works with Mechanim, that sounds really awesome. Sounds really cool.
Yeah. It was interesting. I enjoyed playing it with it, and yeah, there seem to be other little animation libraries, popping up on GitHub and stuff that people
Oh,
are making, and yeah, people are doing some interesting things, definitely.
nice.
Of course, we got Simon, who's a big fan of test-driven development. So, is that anything that you might want to look into? Is kind of doing like unit testing or anything like that with
Uh, no,
dots and
really. I got to say,
stuff?
unit testing is not something for me. I definitely do test-driven development in the sense that every code that I write, I try to think, okay, how do I make this in a way that if I needed to, I could write a test for it. So I always try to think in that way, try to
Mm,
reduce coupling
yeah,
as much as possible. But yeah, I never usually write the actual tests.
like
Which I'm
if
actually
you're
curious. So does the Unity test runner, does that work with dot stuff? Does it or not?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so and I think Simon could probably give us a little bit more info on this because I know he is really big on test-driven development. But yeah, I believe you can write unit
Yes.
tests, just
Interesting.
as you would.
Yeah, because I guess the test
Yeah.
runner would need to instantiate a dot swarm, an entity
Yeah, I
swarm,
I
in
think
order
you
to
create a world
plug
and
the
then
entities
you
for
kind of,
testing.
yeah, create entities with whatever, systems that you're testing for and everything.
Okay. All right. Interesting.
Write tests and don't bug fix. Yeah, I think, I don't know, it's an interesting thing, but again, I kind of like do, I think, like a little bit more kind of what you're saying where, I mean, I have a very like iterative development approach where like, as I'm making things, I'm constantly inspecting the values and making sure that they're like, correct at each like, intermediate stage as I'm building something out.
Oh yeah.
And I think another really helpful approach is kind of like doing the, um, old John Carmack thing of like, every time that you create a new feature, just put a breakpoint in your
Oh
code
yeah, and
and
go
then
through it step by
just
step.
yeah,
Yeah.
step through it line by line and just, confirm, mentally that everything is, kind of doing exactly what you think that it should.
So do you tend to use debuggers a lot? Because I got to say that is something for me that I don't actually use too much. I normally use tons of logs to validate all kinds of values to make sure that everything is working. But yeah, debugger for some reason it's been a tool that I never quite got used to it. I mean, when I started making IRC scripts, then making Flash games and so on. I'm pretty sure debuggers didn't exist with that. So I basically
Right.
basically spent like 10, 15 years as a programmer getting used to debugging through logs. So yeah, that's why I never use that tool. But yeah, is that something that you normally use?
Yeah, I love
Oh, nice.
debuggers. Well, because
Awesome.
I use the JetBrains Writer editor, and I think the debugger in there just works really well. It works really well with entities, actually. Like, if you're over an entity, you can do the little drop down, and you can inspect all the components and see what their data is and everything. And works with like blob assets, and yeah, there's a lot of yeah. I mean, it's all the information that you need,
Nice.
as you need it, and you can see it, step by step, and like, you can again see within a frame. And I think one of the issues sometimes with like printing things out is you can kind of get like a giant spam of
Mhm.
messages, and it can kind of be hard to sort through those sometimes.
And does
So
it work with burst?
um I believe I usually end up turning burst off,
Oh, okay, yeah.
when I'm testing, but I think it's still the breakpoint still might hit, because yeah, again, basically like the way that it works is like, how when the code gets generated, um, if you ever inspect the generated code, you see that
Yeah,
like, it's like hashtag line, and then it
exactly.
maps to the line of your code. So, if you get an error, then you can kind of like map that back to there. So, um,
Although that part isn't 100%, because I did have an issue with that, and it
oh
was,
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't
I
remember what I was
remember
working
that.
on, but yeah, some kind of bugging was telling me it's on this line, but I'm looking at this line, there's nothing. I'm adding logs before and after, and the logs are running fine. So where's the error? Turns out that apparently the source generator can sometimes mess up on line numbers. So the answer was the error wasn't on that; it was like 3 lines below. So yeah, that was a that was an interesting one. It definitely took me quite by surprise. I never expected the error line to not be on the actual error. So yeah, that was quite tricky. But at least now I know. Okay, if you ever find something very strange on some burst errors, try to look on the lines around it, not just that exact line, because that might happen.
Yeah, it looks like we see someone experience the same
Yeah.
thing as well. And by the way, thank you very much for the super chats.
Nice.
Says,
Thank
hey,
you.
joining late. Have you ever tried Dots plus the XR interaction toolkit for standalone VR? Love to see a tutorial about this. Have you done much VR stuff lately or in the past at
No,
all?
no, that is one of those things that is permanently on my to-do list, constantly needing to find the time. So I've done a little bit of research, but I haven't really. I definitely want to try out, but yeah, haven't really looked into it. Yeah, the XR interaction toolkit. I also get a bit lost because there seems to be so many interaction toolkits, so many different ones. Like Meta has one, Steam has one, Unity has one, something like that. So yeah, that seems like a bit of a, a confusing world without just one single standard. So
Yeah, I
yeah.
I really like the XR interaction toolkit. I think it's really great. I do not like the Meta SDK
Oh,
that it has for
okay.
Unity. It is a complete mess and uses everything that I hate about object-oriented programming to the fullest extent.
Okay. All right.
But yeah, no, the XR interaction toolkit is really good. I have used it for some Dots projects. It wasn't a standalone VR project. It was a PC VR project. But yeah, I mean, it should work for standalone VR projects as well. Because yeah, I think as far as I've seen, Dot stuff works on standalone VR no
Yeah.
problem. And yeah, the only thing with XR Interaction Toolkit is it's still all game object based. So um, when you like pull the trigger on your controller to like select an object, it's still shooting out like Unity raycasts. So a lot
Mm.
of times you end up having to, like, if you want to interact with physics entities, then you kind of have to like also shoot a dots
Oh,
physics
you have to.
raycast,
All right.
and then you
Okay.
can compare the results and see which one is closer, if it's a game object or entity or UI element. So it ends up getting a little bit messy for that reason. But yeah, no, other than that, I really enjoy using the XR interaction toolkit for VR stuff.
Oh, nice. Cool. Yeah, definitely need to find the time so I can work on that because yeah, VR is a fascinating area. Definitely something that I very much would like to work on quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
definitely.
have you seen the Meta Project Orion? I mean, that seems quite fascinating. I would love
Yeah.
to. I would love to try experiment developing some things for that. That should be
I
Very
know. Yeah.
interesting one. Yeah.
Yeah, AR is something that I've always just been like really fascinated about. I think there's so many interesting use cases and potential opportunities for them, but right now it's just the hardware isn't quite there as far as
Yeah.
like consumer ready devices.
Oh
But
yeah.
I mean, people are investing a lot of resources, especially Meta and some of the other companies. And I went to CES a couple years ago, and there was a bunch of companies like experimenting around with like different lens technology and stuff. And I mean, there's a lot of really cool tech, but yeah, it's just very expensive
Oh
as far
yeah.
as I know.
Have you tried the Apple Vision Pro?
I have, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, nice. What'd you like?
I thought it was awesome. It's
Nice.
I haven't used a ton of VR headsets, but it had the clearest display of any VR headset that I've used. Even though they say it's not technically a VR headset, I mean it basically is a
Yeah.
VR headset. But yeah, I thought like text was like very readable within it. I think like it was kind of like the first device where I put on where I was like, oh, like I could actually like enjoy doing work with this headset on.
Nice. Yeah.
And so yeah, because yeah, I have a couple times used my Quest 2 to do work in, which is kind of fun sometimes. Like, I'll have like the Unity, it can be up like really big, and I'll have like a code editor and maybe like some like
Nice.
giant screen with like some UFC fights on or something. So it is like a cool experience, but the displays aren't perfect, and so you kind of have
Yeah,
to be
exactly.
zoomed in like a little bit more than you would want to make it all clear. So
Yeah, I mean, I tried the Apple Vision Pro for the first time right now at Unite, and yeah,
okay,
there was a nice demo there, and yeah, I was quite amazed at how good it looks. I mean, it costs $3,500, so yeah,
right,
it better
right.
be good. But yeah, regardless of price point, the tech is definitely very impressive. I was definitely quite impressed. Like after putting it on, the pass through, after a while, your brain just accepts. Okay, I'm looking basically at reality.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, I was
yeah.
very impressed with the quality. Really nice. If they
What do
can get
they
the price down, that would be really awesome.
what do they have you do in the demo?
Oh, there was
Kind of
a
some
it was
basic
an
stuff.
avatar demo. So basically there was an avatar walking around. I could pick up some items, give to the avatar. They would like take pictures and something. So yeah, it was a nice little demo. Nice.
Awesome. I'm just kind of running through chat here and see if there's anything want to bring up. So yeah, seems like some people have done dots in VR, but was not able to build till recently.
Oh, really?
Okay, so yeah, I wonder if that was a standalone or if that was more PC VR. Because yeah, I hadn't really had any issues as far as like building for the PC VR stuff, but again, maybe standalone could be a little bit different there.
As far as I know, Dots only has limitations when it comes to WebGL. So other than
Yeah,
that,
and
as far as I
actually,
know, it should work.
someone had kind of brought up something like that. Yeah, so Dots is great, but it's a deal breaker that
Yeah.
Unity isn't adding WebGL support for entities graphics anytime soon. So yeah,
Yeah,
it is.
sadly. Yeah.
Yeah, again, a little bit unfortunate that there are kind of some limitations for entities graphics, and of course, you can't really do multi-threading and burst compiling when you're running within a browser. Um, Although I'm not sure how much web GPU will at least be able to
Yeah,
change
exactly.
things as far as like the entities graphics rendering goes. So I know you, of course, came from a heavy background of making like web-based games. So is
Yeah.
this something that you kind of like, it's kind of like your roots? Is that something that you kind of would want to get back to? Is maybe making some web-based games, or are you kind of like most of the games that you want to make are kind of like more Steam-based games, or
I mean, most that I would like to make would be Steam-based games, just because that's the like when it comes to web. If I'm going to spend a ton of time working on something, I would rather it be able to sell something, and sell something on the web can't really do it. As opposed on Steam, you can sell a few copies. So like for me, the only I was making Flash games for like 5 years, and like my most played Flash game was, I think it was Game Corp, which got like 6 million plays. And those
dang,
6 million, yeah, that's quite a lot. But
yeah,
those 6 million plays were worth like $2,000. And then I made a remaster of that game, put it on Steam, sold like 1,000 copies, and made like 50 times more money. So yeah, web is really awesome. It's really awesome for trying out ideas. You can just send someone a URL and they can play it. So I think
yeah,
it is really
yeah.
cool. but yeah, it does have that downside of monetization. If you want to make indie games as a living, then yeah, going for the web becomes quite a bit tricky. But when it
Well,
comes to prototyping, when it comes to learning about it, I do think it is really awesome. Like some other thing that I just learned about at Unite was how Unity has something called Struct, which I had no idea
oh yeah, yeah,
existed.
yeah.
And apparently you can make games, upload them on the web, and they have a nice portal. And some of those games do have millions of plays. So yeah, it is a when it comes to getting feedback and putting something in front of players as quickly as possible, I do think web is really awesome. So yeah, I do wish that Dots had web support so you could benefit that while making some quick prototypes to play on the web. That would be awesome.
With those struct games that, like you say, some of those games have millions of plays, are those all distributed through like kind of Unity's like a Unity owned platform, or like are people distributing those on other sites and services
I
where they're getting
think
a lot of the plays?
I don't know, but as far as I know, Struct used to be like an external thing that Unity bought. So I think Struct is
Hmm.
also like an app on the App Store, something like that.
Okay.
So there's like the website play.unity.com, which goes to that. But then I guess on the app you can also play the games through there. I'm not sure. I haven't looked into that too much, but yeah, there's definitely potential because some of those games do have millions of plays. So yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting. Did you kind of like looked into it a little bit after, because we just learned about this at Unite. I
Yeah.
remember like we were talking with, I think, Thomas, and he
Oh
was telling
yeah.
me about this. And you're like, wait, what? What is this?
Yeah, I had no idea that it existed. So
So have you looked into some of the games, and like what kinds of games are people making on there with that?
there's actually quite a lot of variety. There's some shooters, some platformer games. There's actually quite a lot of stuff. So yeah, and the whole thing seems to be like the whole Struct platform is like a sort of node visual based tool. So you don't even have to make the game directly inside Unity. You can use some kind of game making tool, and then
Hmm.
hopefully like export that project into Unity and continue building upon it. So yeah, it does seem to be quite capable, quite a lot of variety. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Um, Back to some Dots stuff. Is there any feature that you feel specific, or any specific Dots feature that Unity is neglecting, something that might not even be on their roadmap? Um, is anything kind of come to mind for you for that?
I mean, the main thing is animation, which thankfully is on the roadmap.
Right.
So yeah, I guess beyond that, oh, I guess yeah, someone actually asked me the other day, which was about input, is how there's no would be
Mm,
nice to have some kind of native input component, something like that, some native way of handling input, because right now you just have the input system, which is all based on objects, events, and so on. So I guess it would be nice to have a native input manager, which yeah, I'm pretty sure is not there on the roadmap. So yeah, that would be an interesting one.
have you been handling most of your input just from the mono behavior side?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, just handling for mono behavior script, listening for mouse down, for making the selection units, giving orders, and so on. So yeah, just doing that. And then from the mono behavior, interacting with the entities, telling them, okay, move here, and so on. So yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I noticed in your course, that you said you kind of like started with just the regular old input system, and you said, later on you might be kind of refactoring towards the
Yeah.
new input system. Maybe I haven't got to that point in that lecture, but like, is that something that you have done in your course already, or is that
Uh,
something you're
Nope,
planning on
not yet.
doing?
Definitely leaving that until the end. I mean, I'm a huge fan of the input manager as something so simple. Like you want to test out for a button down, literally just one line of code and
Yeah.
done. No need to create input action asset, define the action, and so on. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of making the input manager. Keep using that for the majority of the project. And then at the end, refactor the whole thing, the input system. That is usually how I work. And yeah, it has worked quite well for me. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like we also have someone else that says they execute inputs from mono behavior. You can make ECS commands from mono behavior scripts too. So yeah, I'm guessing, calling entity manager, setting things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that works pretty well. I've actually been kind of using the newer input system, and actually using system-based systems to kind of
Oh,
store a
okay.
reference to um, the input system asset or whatever, and then within there, I'm kind of listening to events, or reading input, and just setting the
Oh,
components directly in there. So that's something that's worked pretty well for me. But
oh, nice. Yeah, that is actually something real nice because something that a question that I've had and that people have asked me, which is when would you use system based versus iSystem? And yeah, that that is a great example of one case where system based would be quite
Yeah.
useful.
Yeah, because the thing with system base is you can, or with iSystem, you can't have managed fields on an iSystem,
Yeah.
but you can on system base. So that's kind of like one place that I use them.
Oh, nice.
Um, and actually, so I remember the thing that I was going to ask you a little bit earlier. Have you used like subscenes much? Like done any kind of like interesting things with maybe having multiple subscenes and kind of loading and unloading them and
Nope. For that, I've really just been using just a single subscene containing all the entities. So yeah, I haven't really looked into that. I guess that is more useful when you make lots of like a giant world and you want to split the world into parts, so have multiple subscenes. I
right.
imagine that would be the main use case. So yeah, I haven't really used much. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's that. And actually one thing that you I think had mentioned in one of your earlier lectures about just how, with subscenes, like everything gets baked down into the
Yeah.
subscene. So, once it's all baked, you don't have to like kind of load all
Yeah.
that and
It's super
everything.
fast, the
So
whole thing. Yeah.
one thing that I had used it for is I was making this kind of like racing game project where I did actually kind of some flow field pathfinding to essentially bake the like flow field of the track, and
Oh.
it took quite a long time to um, bake or like basically calculate that flow field and everything. So I just actually had the flow field itself just within its own single subscene.
Oh,
And
nice.
then so when I just, when I closed the subscene, it would just, bake that. And, it would actually take a couple minutes to bake to, go through and do that. So that's something that I didn't want to have to
Nice.
happen,
Yeah.
every time I changed some small little value within my subscene. So yeah, I had that all in one separate subscene, close that, and then just, let that be. And then I could change everything else in the kind of main subscene as needed.
Oh, nice. That's cool. And did you manually load that subscene, or was it present in the scene,
It
just
was just present
closed?
in the scene. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And then, yeah, just because, both sub scenes, I only had one world. So, like, both sub scenes were within the same world that, everything could interact with them. And yeah, it was actually really easy
Right.
to do.
Yeah, that's definitely a very cool use case. Nice.
Let's see here. Gonna go ahead and to the chat here real quick and see if there's anything. So it looks like making a little WebGL with dots right now. Very good, very good. What's the name of the website? That was just play.unity.com, I think.
Yeah, yeah,
For
for
the
struct.
struct
Yeah.
stuff, right? Yeah. One thing that I think I miss and don't know if it's even possible is to do hot reload in dots. Have you used, I know there's like a hot reload
The
asset
asset.
on the asset
Yeah.
store. Have you messed around with that much?
No, I haven't used it. I've looked at a bit of the documentation. It does seem extremely capable, but yeah, haven't really used it. So I do wonder, would that actually work with dots or not? Since dots has a lot of source generation, I guess that's a good question. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, with source generation and burst, yeah, I don't know. Would be an interesting thing to know if
Hmm.
that works. So it's something that I should probably experiment around with a little bit just to see kind of what
Yeah.
the experience is like. Uh, would like to see full ragdoll with skinned mesh, fully in dots. Sounds fun.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, I do wonder. Ragdolls don't work at all because they're based on skinned objects, right? Yeah. Because of course the colliders, I assume all the colliders used in a ragdoll they do work. I assume dots already has all of those physics limitations and so on. I assume all of that is implemented. So yeah, I guess it's just the rendering for the skin mesh. I guess that's the one part that wouldn't quite work.
Yeah, I think there actually is one of the Unity sample projects within the physics samples. There is kind of a ragdoll thing, but it's again basically just using joints. So it's all
Just
kind of
yeah,
primitive colliders and everything, and yeah, not like a actual kind of skinned mesh for that.
right. Yeah.
Um, 6 days to release of Unity 6. Anything you excited about in Unity 6?
And main thing is I really want to look at those graphics features because I haven't yet looked at them at all. I mean, they seem really awesome. Like just trigger a a checkbox and all of a sudden everything runs 20% faster. That sounds really awesome. So yeah, definitely that is one thing that I have on my to-do list of the many videos that I want to do after I finish the course. Definitely want to look into those, and also the adaptive pro volumes, using those to make a time of day system, baking all the lights and then interpolating between them. That seems really cool. I definitely want to research that topic. Yeah. Have you used adaptive pro volumes at all?
No, not at all.
Okay. It
Yeah.
doesn't look really impressive. Doesn't look extremely capable. So yeah.
Oh, very much. Yeah. And yeah, I thought it was really cool that they're kind of giving that away, that like sample scene that has all like the
Oh
Cinti
yeah, the
castle
Fantasy
assets and
Kingdom,
everything
right?
like
Yeah,
that.
that's
Yeah.
going to be downloadable. Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. What else about Unity 6? I think, I mean, yeah, just good that dots seems to work a lot better in the editor. I know there was one kind of thing here. Did they fix the hierarchy in ECS dots 1.0? I still personally have a lot of issues and frustrations with the entities hierarchy window.
Really?
Is this something that you're just kind of okay with, or have you
I guess the
noticed some of the
hierarchy,
issues?
I normally don't have too many issues with the hierarchy. For me, the main one is just on the inspector. Just sometimes have to switch back into authoring mix to go back into runtime. Otherwise, the whole
Yeah,
thing
you
gets
kind of got to
bugged.
refresh it. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, on the hierarchy, I also don't tend to use the hierarchy too much. So yeah, guess I'm not sure what issues they have there. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, personally, for me, I think the biggest and most obvious thing is just that like it looks exactly like the regular Unity
Right.
hierarchy, but it doesn't have all the same features. So you can't like multi-select
Oh yeah, right.
entities.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah.
then like I a lot of times like to use the arrow keys to like expand and
Mm.
collapse
Yeah.
hierarchies, and you can't do that with the entities hierarchy
Oh,
as well.
okay. I see. Yeah.
So there's just like a bunch of little things like that. But there and a couple months ago, I think probably before you started working on your course and stuff, there was just like all like it would just constantly spit out errors into the console for
Yeah, I
like
think I've seen one of your videos talking about that, about all the things
yeah,
they need to fix. And I do remember you mentioned quite a few things about the hierarchy. So yeah.
yeah. So it seems to be in a better state, but yeah, still not quite up to feature parity with the regular hierarchy. Um, yeah, and I don't know how much I personally like having that split between the regular game object hierarchy and entities hierarchy, but
It does seem like they could both be on the same place since entities already have a different icon. So
right, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
I wonder why they don't use the same thing and just have a toggle for show entities or hide entities and just use literally the same code. I wonder. Yeah.
right, yeah, or even just have some other grouping, some other like drop down that appears
Yeah.
that again shows maybe all those like system entities and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, on the hot reload stuff, the package doesn't work with dots, but we need
Oh,
other solutions, so it's too bad.
okay. Yeah.
Looks like I've been using the Rukonka EC or Rukonka
Nice.
animation system. Has a cost, but almost a one-to-one with Unity's Mechanism system. So awesome.
Nice.
Glad
Yeah,
to
that is
hear.
really cool. I mean, that means you don't have to have a huge learning curve. You can just start using it. Yeah, definitely looking forward to trying that out. Nice.
Yeah. I would definitely recommend it. Um, is there a way to force a bake within the editor? So I know the baking system kind of happens a couple of times where if you're changing things on an authoring, it'll seems to do the rebake. Although one thing that I was kind of like experimenting with the other day, it doesn't seem to. This is kind of something that I want to pick Danny's brain about a little bit. It doesn't seem to run the full Baker script. Like it seems like it just updates like those specific fields that you're modifying.
Really?
So one thing that I noticed, and again, this may be like a very specific thing, but what I did is I have a enableable component that I am essentially using as a flag to run some initialization logic for an entity. And in there, in the baking script, I was like manually setting, like the enableable component to true for that entity. But then when I was like changing other fields on that entity, it wasn't initializing that enable
Really?
component
Oh,
to true. Like it seemed like it was just changing the like specific fields that I was modifying. And I'm like, okay, like let me see, let me just like, try and do, something really dumb here. And I just like exposed like a Boolean on the mono behavior. And then in the like baking section, I said, set the value of the enableable component to the authoring Boolean. And
yeah.
then it was interesting, anytime that I check marked that box as true, then it would run that initialization logic.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it runs the bake function if you just modify a field on it. Yeah, I guess it does need to update the data.
But yeah,
So
like I was saying, it doesn't seem
huh,
like it runs the full baker, but it's just
it
running
runs
the
just that
one thing
part.
that you're changing.
Oh, interesting. Oh, okay. Yeah, I never I never noticed that.
So
That's
yeah, it
interesting.
was it was a really weird edge case that I came across because yeah, basically what I was trying to do is like I have like a entity that was like kind of moving at a specific angle, and then I wanted it to be like, anytime that I would change that angle, I'd only set the component, specifically when I'm changing that. So I'm not like, doing stuff every single frame. So I just kind of have like a checkbox to like initialize it. Um, but yeah, I was like curious, like if there was any way where when I was modifying that angle field in the
Mhm.
editor, that initialization logic would run, but it didn't seem like it was automatically updating that again, which was kind of weird.
Right. Yeah. And also just a way to force bake in the editor, you can just select the subscene, click on re-import, and it's basically going to rebake the whole thing. So yeah, that is
Yep.
very useful when you're trying to debug some kind of custom baking system. Just click that, it's going to run the whole thing again. You can try it out.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Um, let's see. Linked entity group. Have you
Hmm.
messed around with any linked
What was
entity
that?
group stuff or ran into some issues with it at all?
Oh yeah, definitely ran into a lot of issues without it. That was something that drove me crazy for quite a while. I still don't know if it is a bug or not. How basically if you instantiate a prefab, then everything works fine. You don't need to manually add that. If you destroy the prefab, destroys the children, that does work. But if it is placed on the subscene and you don't have that, you destroy the main one and the children continue to live. I
Yeah.
have no idea if that's a bug or not. That seems very strange. So yeah, that drove me crazy for quite a while.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's because the linked entity group doesn't get added, but I think, is there a linked entity group authoring component built in? I
Yeah,
can just
there
pull
is
this
one.
up.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically you need to add those
Yeah,
for
linked
any
entity group authoring. So yeah,
any entities in
anything,
the
within your
yeah.
sub scene. So
Yeah, that was definitely a crazy issue. Drove me crazy for quite some time. Why is this object being destroyed correctly, but this one isn't? Turns out it's because this one is placed on the subscene, and this one is instantiated, and differences between that one. Okay, that that definitely drove me crazy.
yeah, definitely. Have there been it sounds like you'd kind of mentioned in your course that there have been kind of some really weird edge cases and some things that were
Hmm.
not obvious. Have you found the documentation like kind of like limiting in some cases, and kind of have to like reach out to people to figure things out?
I mean, for the most part, documentation is actually really awesome. I mean, they made a ton of samples, and each of those samples has a ton of details. So I do actually think when it comes to educational content, they do have quite a lot of stuff. So I do think that has been really awesome. But at the same time, dots is such a complex thing that no matter how much documentation they have, there are always going to be these strange, weird edge cases. So yeah, there's always going to be a bit of trial and error once you get through it. But yeah, as a general, honestly, I'm very, very happy with the state of documentation. It has been quite good. Nice.
Yeah, yeah, it has been much better. I think there are still a few things here and there where it is a little bit lacking on some of the documentation. There's just kind of some underdocumented features, but yeah, it seems like they're on like a pretty good track. And like you mentioned, the sample projects, a lot of those stuff
Oh yeah.
are really good. Um, Have there been any of like some of the bigger sample projects that you've dove into? Maybe like the Galaxy sample or Mega City Metro?
The big ones, no, I haven't used them too much. I much prefer much more smaller bite-sized things that teach just one
Yeah,
thing
just
and
one
one thing.
specific thing.
So
Yeah.
yeah, the one that they have on the, I think it's the official ECS symbols one, which has like 20 different scenes, each of them covering different scenarios. So yeah, those have been really awesome. Like in the beginning for learning how to how entities, components, and systems work, learn the absolute basics, having their little hello world example. That was super useful. Then, of
Yeah.
course, when I was researching for the mesh animation, I did find a bunch of those samples, and one of them did say, okay, this is how you swap a mesh, this is how you swap a material. So, yeah, those little bite sized samples, those have been insanely useful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No doubt. Um, and destroying entity having to check for a
Oh,
transform
yeah.
to see if it's really destroyed and clean up.
That was another thing that drove me insane. It's how the apparently the transform component has a cleanup component. So if you destroy it, the entity is destroyed by the end of that frame, or the entity is destroyed whenever you destroy it. Like if you use an entity command buffer at the end, it is destroyed at the end of the frame. But on the next frame, that entity still exists. Or rather, if you ask the entity, do you exist? The entity says no, does not exist. But if you test, does it have a local transform component? Yes, it does. So the entity does not exist, but still exists, and it continues existing until the transform system group, until that one runs on the next frame, and then that one gets rid of the final cleanup component, which then actually destroys the thing. So yeah, that was another thing that drove me insane for quite a while. Why is that I'm destroying this entity? I'm asking the function, does the entity exist? No, it does not exist, but apparently it still exists. Oh, that that was insane.
Wait, so when does that happen? Is that if you have like a
It's if you destroy an entity, then on the next frame, if you have a system that runs before the transform system group, and if you run entity manager that exists, it is going to tell you that the entity no longer exists or does exist. I don't remember. It's one of those two. Either it tells you it doesn't exist or it does exist, but then
yeah,
you
because
test
I
for
think
the
if an entity is destroyed, but there's a cleanup component on there,
yeah,
if you
it
call
doesn't actually
entity
get fully
exists,
destroyed until it gets cleaned up. So in that
right?
case, if you tell it to destroy something at the very end of the frame, the cleanup for the transform is only going to run on the next frame at the middle of the frame. So if you try to test for some state of the entity before that happens, then technically the entity has been destroyed but hasn't been destroyed. So you get a bunch of very strange errors.
Interesting. I don't know if maybe I just haven't came across that, but yeah,
Definitely a very strange one. Yeah.
because yeah, no, I think yeah, if an entity gets destroyed and it has a cleanup component that hasn't been cleaned up, if you call system API dot exists, that will still return true.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though the entity is not
It's like queued
actually
up for destruction, but it still says that it does exist. So yeah, I don't remember what it was. The issue was like, I have a bullet that is destroying a zombie, so it's queuing up for destruction at the end of the frame. But then at the beginning of the next frame, I test does the entity still exist, and I think it says that it still exists.
right. Yeah, it would.
And then I have some kind of code afterwards that assumes that the code verifying does it exist, assumes that code ran correctly. So this code down here is assuming, okay, the entity still exists. But since then, the transform system group has finally destroyed the entity. So this one down here thinks the entity still exists, but no longer exists, and the whole thing breaks. So yeah, that was insane.
Gotcha. Yeah. I guess I don't usually check for if the entity exists. I usually check like if the component exists more.
Yeah, that
So,
was my solution. It says, does it exist? Does it have a local transform component? And with that, I can finally see, is it queued up for destruction? Yes or no?
gotcha. Interesting. Have you been doing anything interesting as far as like destroying entities? Like, I don't remember if what I've seen as far as your lecture goes. I don't even know if maybe I haven't seen those videos, but yeah, do you kind of like queue up the destruction operations, or do you kind of just destroy things throughout the frame? How do you kind of like typically handle?
Usually just run them all on the entity, the end command buffer system. Usually just use that one for destroying entities. So then all the rest of the code can just run normally. So yeah, I find that is much better, avoids a lot of weird issues with like sync points and so on. So yeah, just queue up everything to run at the end, and that seems to work quite nice.
Nice. Yeah, that seems like a pretty good approach. Let's see if there's any other things that I wanted to pull up here. Yeah, I mean, are there any other kind of dots topics that you have recently found interesting, or anything that you wanted to bring up along those lines?
I mean, for me, I've been working on the update for the flow field pathfinding, so it has been really interesting trying to run that. That has been a very interesting challenge, trying to create the pathfinding algorithm, trying to make it support multiple entities asking for paths at the same time, because flow field is quite different from A star because you calculate the entire flow field as opposed to just position A to B. So
Right.
that
Yeah.
makes it quite interesting. How do you get multiple units to follow a path if every time you calculate the path, you're overriding the entire map? So that requires creating, I end up creating multiple flow fields, which in turn means end up having components with native arrays, which then means I need to handle the cleanup and so on. So create lots of entities, lots of things. So yeah, that's definitely been a very interesting challenge working on that and making the debug visuals for all those things. So yeah, that has been my main focus for the past few weeks, and it's been quite interesting. Yeah.
Nice. That's fun stuff. And how often do you update your flow field? Is it basically just as anything on the environment changes, or you kind of constantly doing that, or
It's basically when someone requests a new path. So I've got some kind of caching.
okay.
So if the path for that destination has already been calculated, then just reuse it. No need to
Mm,
recalculate it. But if it's a brand new path, then yeah, use it. And yeah, I'm also do have the listening for obstacles. Like when some building is destroyed, then obviously I got to update the pathfinding under it. So for each grid map, it also has a simple boolean: is this grid still valid, or so on. If it is still valid and someone wants to go to the same destination, just reuse it. If not, then yep, let's recalculate the whole thing again. So yeah.
nice. And then have you done much like stress testing on it to like see, with larger and larger entity counts, how well it performs?
I did on my original prototype, and yeah, it did seem to work quite well. I can't remember how many I used, but I do remember that when I came into performance issues, it wasn't related to the pathfinding at all. It
Okay.
was all the other things. So yeah, in terms of that, when it's
Or like some things on the rendering side, maybe.
yeah, exactly. So when it comes to just calculating the path, that part, thanks to using dots, jobs, bursts, and so on, that becomes insanely fast.
And, yeah, looks like we have ECS based audio is something that
Oh,
is
nice.
on the roadmap. Yeah, again, you had kind of mentioned doing some audio stuff, and yeah, most likely I'm just kind of doing more just spawning game objects kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that is one thing
works
that I
well enough.
haven't yet looked into much. So yeah, it's definitely on my to-do list to research. But yeah, as far as I know, there's no built-in way. So yeah, gonna end up trying to use some game objects with some standard object pooling, and hopefully that will work nice.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I think I had actually seen a question maybe a little bit earlier about wonder if it makes sense to use object pooling in ECS. So from what I've found, and I'm not sure if you've kind of experienced anything differently, but you don't really need to do any kind of traditional object pooling with ECS. One of the things with how ECS works is, anytime that you instantiate a new entity, it creates a new chunk of memory that kind of like, pre-allocates that 16 kilobyte block of memory, for entities of that same archetype. So it kind of almost is like a little bit of a built-in pooling
Yeah.
solution. Like all that memory is kind of like available to you. You just really need to like, set that data for the new entities that you add in. But yeah, I haven't ever really had the need to do any kind of specific pooling in ECS. Is that something similar to what you've seen?
Yeah, same thing. I mean, spawning entities and destroying entities is so fast. There's really no like if you do that in game objects, you open the profiler, you see a very clear spike. But in dots, no, you can spawn 1,000 entities, destroy 1,000 entities, and the whole thing just runs nice and smooth. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, haven't need that at all.
And then this guy says, I would love to see a list of tips and tricks which are good for game object unity, but no longer valid for dots. So yeah, I mean,
Oh,
I guess maybe
interesting.
that could be one of them is
Yeah, pulling is
object
definitely
pooling.
one. Nice. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of different ways that you kind of approach problems in the dot side versus the game object side. So I think there's a lot of interesting things there for sure.
Yeah, nice.
Um, yeah, ECS is made so you don't have to use pools.
Yeah.
No need to use pooling in ECS. Make a bunch of disabled invisible entities, then you could spawn them by cloning.
Yep, exactly.
Code Monkey, are you working on a new game?
This year is way too busy, way too tricky, but hopefully next year, hopefully do something and hopefully use dots in it. So yeah, should be fun.
Yeah, you had mentioned that you might want to get back to your
Yeah, Total War Liberation. That was the one
Yep.
that I announced, which I guess is nice. I mean, since I announced it so long ago, since then it has been slowly gathering wish list. So
Okay. Okay.
I guess when I finally get back to it, I will have a nice big starting point. Yeah.
Nice. Do you know, like, I don't know how much like analytics Steam gives you on as far as like where wish lists are coming from, but do you
Oh,
kind of like feel like it's like mostly from your channel, or if people are just kind of like coming across it organically on Steam, or
I there as far as I know, there's no source. You can't really see that, but yeah, I would assume most of it, if not all of it, is really coming from my channel. Since I haven't participated in any Steam festival and so
right,
on, I
right.
assume in terms of like general exposure, hasn't probably gotten much on Steam. But still, it's I mean the devlogs that I made last year about it, those did pretty nice, and yeah, it seems that people were liking the game idea. So last I checked, which was a few months ago, already had like 5,000 wish lists. So yeah,
Nice.
yeah,
All right.
that that should be a nice thing for whenever I get back to that project. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, that kind of reminds me that I did actually see that all your games are on sale right now.
Oh, yeah, yeah. There's a Steam sale right now, the Ada Lovelace sale. It's got, so if you like automation games, factory games, then yeah, my game Dinky Guardians is on that sale as
Yeah,
long as
Dinky Guardians is on there, and
yeah,
yeah, I saw all your other ones: Battle
yeah, all of
Royale
them also, yeah,
Tycoon, Ninja Tycoon, Hyper Knights Battle, Hyper Knights, Blueprint Tycoon, Survivor Squad Gauntlets, Game Corp
yeah,
DX, and Survivor Squad,
yeah, nice.
all available for pretty cheap prices, actually.
Yeah, that list is 10 years worth of work. It's nice. It's nice to
Yeah,
see the whole list like that.
no,
Nice.
you got a good list of games here. So yeah, check it out if you do want to.
Yeah, nice. Thank you.
All right. Unity Ada support win.
Like the language, I've never used it. Isn't that one of those functional languages? I gotta say that is one thing that I've never really used. I've only
I mean, I don't know. Probably could be referring to a number of things. I think Ada Lovelace though is
yeah, the
maybe
original programmer. Yeah.
yeah, there's that, and then it's also like the name of a NVIDIA GPU architecture as well.
Oh yeah, they use, yeah.
So
Okay, so Ada is object oriented. All right, interesting. Okay.
do you find yourself doing bigger scopes as your skills grow, or do you stick to the same scope just to make it and ship faster?
It's a good question.
It is a really good question.
Uh yeah, good question. I guess naturally it kind of, the scope grew kind of a little bit, but never to an insane point. So like the most I've worked on a game, I think was, yeah, I think like Battleground Tycoon was like 18 months. So yeah, that is quite
Okay.
a bit more complex than like Game Corp DX or even like the original version of Survivor Squad, which was my first Steam game. So for that was like a 7 months development cycle. Then I worked on it for like 6 months more before going on to Steam. So yeah, as my skills improves, I definitely increase the scope by a little bit, but thankfully not by way too much. So I've never really like spent 5 years working on a single game, making something really massive. No, thankfully, thankfully I keep my scope nice and managed. So yeah,
Yeah, you seem to be really good about that, about keeping your
yeah.
scope, at a manageable level, and that's something that I hear you say all the time
Oh
on your
yeah,
videos is, yeah.
yeah, because I know it can very easily, very quickly get out of hand. And yeah, I basically went through those issues back in my Flash days. There were several projects that I tried
Mm,
making, and I quickly realized, okay, this is not going to work. So so thankfully, I learned that lesson quite a long time ago. So nowadays,
yeah.
I always keep that in mind.
I'm sure that's something that you learn very quickly in
Oh
the
yeah.
Flash days.
Yeah, it was like for my third Flash game, I had the brilliant idea, why don't I make an MMO game? Okay, that that was obviously insane. That was never gonna happen. So yeah, I tried that. I worked on that project for like 3 or 4 months until I realized, yeah, this is not gonna work. The code was just a messy, just spaghetti code all over the place, doing connections directly to the server, directly to other players, lots of hard coded events and so on. So yeah, that was not a fun experience. But thankfully, I had the experience a very long time ago, so nowadays I already know to avoid that pain.
Although it does seem like your games are kind of like, evolving a little bit, like this Dinky Guardians. I think is Dinky Guardians. That's basically your first like commercial 3D game, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Previously, I would only make 2D just because I'm not an artist. I cannot make 3D models. And back then, I didn't really know much how to use the asset source. So yeah, the Guardians was the first one that I used the asset source properly to buy the assets that I need for the skills that I don't have and use those to uh, make the final game. And I'm quite happy with how it came out. I think despite me not having art skills, the fact that I was able to buy assets that were made by proper artists, I think because that I managed to make the game that looks actually, I think, pretty nice. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it looks good, and I think you've kind of mentioned this in some of your devlogs of that game, is like how you kind of were still kind of tweaking things to kind of like fit your style,
Oh
so it
yeah.
wasn't just like completely off the shelf.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. Grabbing assets, make sure they fit together, using a common shader, and make the whole thing. Yeah. Consistency is definitely one of the things that I've learned. For me, as someone with no art skills, I've learned that consistency matters quite a lot more than just having high quality assets. If you have like two high quality assets but they don't fit together, that is not going to look good. Whereas if you have two not so high quality assets but they look like they are consistent, that is going to look much better. So yeah, that's definitely one of the tips that I've learned as a programmer trying to do art.
yeah, definitely, yeah. Yeah, I'm working on a little bit of a project right now, and that's something that's really key to me. Is I just want to have like a good, consistent art style.
Yeah.
Make sure everything like fits, and yeah.
Yeah.
And this actually kind of reminds me. So yeah, they say Ada, the language.
Language.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of something. I know we've kind of talked about. A lot of things that you want to do, and it's kind of like a matter of time for a lot of these things. But have you experimented around with any data-oriented programming languages, or is that something that you have any desire to investigate at any point?
No, not really, but I definitely would like to try it out. I mean, there are so many languages. Like, for example, I've never really done much like hardcore web development stuff, but I watch a bunch of YouTube videos from like the Primogen and people talking about web dev and lots of interesting languages, interesting things. And yeah, I definitely would love to spend some time researching those, like researching about like Rust has an interesting or no, I think it's Rust, like the Bevy game engine. Isn't that like
Yep,
the
yep, yep,
ECS
yep,
based game engine? So yeah,
yep.
I definitely would love to spend some time researching that to see how exactly does it work, what does it do differently. It should be interesting comparison. Yeah.
Yeah, we got Odin ref incoming. Yep, I
Mm.
definitely want to check out the Odin programming language myself. Danny on the stream a couple weeks ago gave us a little introduction into the Odin programming language, and he's actually going to be doing the second part of that in just a couple weeks here, where he's going to be showing how to use the Raylib with Odin. I don't know if you're
Oh,
much familiar
okay.
with Raylib, but it's kind of from what I understand, it's a pretty lightweight like graphics
Yeah.
framework essentially.
Oh, nice. It's an interesting project. Yeah.
So yeah, and yeah, he was kind of showing us how he did some crazy things to use the Odin programming language to manipulate data in Unity ECS, which was very
Wait,
typical Danny thing to do.
how? So an external thing, or he's running code
Yeah.
in Odin?
Yeah, yeah. So
How to
he basically compiled it down to like a DLL, I think, and
Oh,
then
okay.
yeah, from that was able to use it to control some things
All
in
right. Okay,
Unity
that's
ECS.
interesting.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of cool things there.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Is there any other thing that you want to talk about before we close things out here?
Yeah, it's been awesome. Dots is awesome. Definitely looking forward to continue working with it, continue building lots of interesting things. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you've been experimenting with it a lot more. And again, I have really been enjoying your course, even though, I
Yes.
am kind of familiar with a lot of the stuff, but I think the way that you kind of go about teaching things is really good, and, show a lot of the weird edge cases and things that you have to solve within Unity. So yeah, I definitely would recommend checking that out.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as we kind of close things out here, we can get into the dynamic allocation portion of the show, or this is where we just kind of share some fun things with the community here. So Hugo, you have a video that you want to share with people. So why don't you give a little intro into what this is here?
Yeah, it's a really nice video. It's about how to make basically Vampire Survivors using building it inside of Unity, but specifically using it without using dots, which is actually it's a really interesting video that covers quite a lot of very powerful tips when it comes to making things performant. I mean, with dots, it's really awesome how you get performance basically by default, but all of these tips are still things that are super useful for whether you're working dots or non-dots, which is basically how you don't have to update everything all the time, and you don't have to update, like, for example, in the game Vampire Survivors, you've got thousands of units, but you don't necessarily have to update those thousands of units. Chances are the unit over here is not going to interact with one over here. So you can just do spatial partitioning, like we were talking about a while ago, and you can basically limit how many units need to be updated at one point. So that is always one extremely important performance tip. Anytime you have some kind of issue, just remember, do you really need to cycle through all of those units, game objects, whatever it is? Do you really need to cycle through all of them, or can you limit basically the searching for just a small amount? So only update as much as you need to. And the other super important tip is don't update often, or don't update more than you need to. So that's a super important performance tip that I myself have used for many, many years, even before finding out about dots or anything like that. It's always just, okay, the enemy has some kind of complex logic. Do I need to run that 60 times per second? The answer is no, probably not. I can probably run that like 5 to 10 times per second, and it's going to work just fine, and it's going to be super performant. And then something they mentioned in the video is how if you have like tons of enemies, you don't have to run all the enemy logic all the exact same frame, which is going to give you a massive spike. You can just update this one, then on the next frame, update this one, then this one, and so on.
Right. Yeah.
So
distribute things over time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that is really an excellent video talking about performance, how you don't have to update everything all the time. You can limit things, and in the end, everything is quite nice and performant. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's hits on a lot of good, just kind of performance related
Oh yeah.
things. And I think this really just kind of like goes back to some of the core ideas of data oriented design, where it's like, you're really just kind of choosing the right solutions to the problems that you're trying to solve. And you don't, ECS isn't necessarily always going to be the solution. And if you have a game object based project, it's like, you still have a lot of options for optimizing things in really efficient ways. So yeah, and I think this video does a good job about hitting on a lot of these
Oh yeah.
things. Before we move on to my thing, actually just wanted to pull this question up here real quick. Have you ever considered doing an app versus a game with dots?
It's a good question. I guess I don't know. I'm not too familiar with app development, so I guess I'm curious to see what are the main benefit of dots is performance. So what are the performance bottlenecks in apps? I guess I don't know. I guess because I've never really worked with it too much, but I would assume the main performance issue is just the time to contact the server and get data back. So I don't know if there's quite a lot of performance issues locally. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on what you're doing. I guess the way that I take this is just kind of like more of a general broad, like, non-game applications. And I have actually had the opportunity to do some contracting work on some non-game applications that use dots, where, anytime that you kind of have some type of like maybe some simulations where you want to have real-time visualizations of, what's happening within the world. I think dots is a really great candidate for that. Yeah. So, there definitely have been, some people who have reached out to me for things like that. But I think, I don't know, most of the things that I personally want to make with dots are more kind of like on the game side anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I can go ahead and share my little dynamic allocation. So yeah, I wanted to give a shout out to
the card is used in
that. Want to give it a little shout out to Thomas Stewart. He's a fellow game dev creator over here on YouTube. And he's kind of like recently, within the past year or so, has basically quit his job and gone fully independent game development. And so yeah, he's kind of like working on prototyping out a couple new ideas for some games right now.
Oh,
I think he basically said that he's going to be doing like three about prototypes of different games, and then just kind of like wanting to hear feedback from the community on what people like and if there's any particular game that he should move forward with. So this game here that he was just showcasing was this naval combat deck builder chess game.
mm,
So it's kind of played out on this grid, and then you have your ships and there's enemy ships, and then you basically have all these cards that are basically mapped to chess pieces. And then so you can see, I think there's like different colors of cards. So some of them are essentially like movement tiles or movement cards, and then some of them are attacking cards. And so it's like based off of how the different chess pieces move and attack. You basically play out the attacks in that way. So I think it's a really interesting concept here. I thought it was really cool. So I'll go ahead and paste the link to this video here.
yeah, definitely an interesting one. I mean, might be a bit complex to explain the whole thing, but at least in terms of concept, does seem like a very interesting mix. Nice.
Yeah. It is kind of like, I think it's just an interesting combination of a couple
Mm.
different, like existing genres and kind of known games and stuff. So yeah, I think it's cool.
Nice, yeah. And also something that he has talked about in videos about trying to make indie dev, make a living from indie dev. One real interesting thing that he mentioned is how basically he ports all of his games onto consoles,
Mm.
and he can't really share those numbers because those are under NDA. But he does say how what he gets from consoles is either more or equivalent to what he gets from Steam. So it does help quite a bit to port those things onto consoles. So yeah, that is one thing that it's one thing that I've had on my to-do list for literally years. All my games are only on Steam, so I would love to put something onto consoles because, yeah, I mean, Steam is super crowded. So if you can get something on Steam and then get
Exactly,
something into all those other stores, if you have just one source, it might be really tricky to make a living. But apparently, he's seems to be doing relatively all right, being on both Steam and on those consoles. So yeah, it's a interesting strategy. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, anytime you have that, like, a little bit more of a barrier to entry to get onto those console platforms, then, of course, then it's, like they say, like on Steam last year, there was like, 17,000 games or something
Oh, yeah.
released.
Yeah.
And, it, can hopefully kind of like give you at least some more eyeballs on your game. And,
Mm.
yeah, so I think it is definitely good advice to
Oh, yeah.
get your game on different platforms. All right. Well, yeah, let's that'll pretty much wrap up today's show of the Hot Path Show. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us here today. Thank you all for the good, exciting questions and comments within the chat here. Really fun. And again, thank you to Hugo for joining on here today. It was a ton of fun. Glad to have you on here.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. This was fun. I mean, I've been watching the show for a long time, so it's fun to be on here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, maybe we'll have you back on a little bit later, and maybe with some of the other co-hosts and everything, and just kind of
Sure.
do some fun hangouts. I want to start doing more, just kind of having more guests on and being able to talk about, again, data-oriented design and game development and just other, cool, interesting, fun game development topics. So yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good. Nice.
Awesome. Well, yeah. Thanks again, everybody. And then real quick, do just want to thank our Patreon supporters at the CPU Register tier, which is our highest tier. So thank you very much to eCool and Hakan for your support over there. And of course, if you do want to support us over on Patreon or through YouTube memberships, check the links down below. We have some cool bonuses over there. So yeah, anyways, with that, thanks again, Hugo, and we'll see y'all later.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.